Beep 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 beep. All that's new and approved from the Jester News. Right, okay, hello there. This is about the third one I've done this week. There's just been do it now because it's so important. So let's do it now. What have I got my funny little bits on today? Well, we've got the guidance from Mermaids to people who wish to complete the consultation in regards to the specifications drawn up post the interim CAS report by the NHS for the provision of so-called gender health care. Yes, before we start, it's as bad as you think it is. But nevertheless, let us get into this. Let's get into the meat and potatoes of this document, right? Okay. So it's called the Guidance for Consultation Responses. As usual, in the doobries, in the comments, links to everything attached to this, including the actual downloadable document from Mermaids, which has been released today. What we've got is a number of pages, 13 in all, from the document here. What are the overall concerns you might want to raise is the beginning of this document. So they're saying to members of the public, to your good self, to those who believe in gender identity, here's what you might want to raise. Okay? Let's begin. The key issues we suggest raising throughout your response to this consultation. Remember, this is designed to give people a template of ideas to work with. Risk of denying access to the waiting list for children and young people who need assessment and care. Well, I don't remember ever see anything where risk denying access people to the waiting list. What they've said is here, you see that the problem they've got is here, that their access to the interim service will include an additional consultation stage between phase 1 services and the patient's GP before joining the waiting list, which may cause further delays to accessing care or deny access to it. Well, let's have the Jester version of that sentence, shall we? We put in, the NHS is putting in a triage phase in order to get LARPers out of the way and also to get confused children out of the way and to ensure that people aren't being fast-tracked into this particular ridiculous situation, i.e. the trans train, and we're going to make sure that they don't get fast-tracked into it by having a service in between the eventual end game of serious problems with their suffering as an individual child, which may or may not be related to anything to do with gender. It probably isn't. And that's what we're going to do. We're going to put it in. Well, what they're saying is it's denying access. It's not denying access. It won't delay anything. What it will do is it will ensure the confused and children that have particular issues or are suffering will be treated without any mention or without any pushing towards this nonsense, seeing as we know the damage that's been done so far is so terrible that the Tavistock has been closed down. Right, next thing, right, they've got on the list here is, the medicalisation of social transition. The service specification attempts to treat social transition as a medical intervention. It is a medical intervention. What do you think it is? If you're saying that somebody needs to socially transition because of 2 reasons, there's only 2. They have a psychological problem, which means they're mentally unwell, and therefore they transition socially to feel better. That's a medical intervention, right? Okay? Or they're a believer in innate gender identity, which means they're not very well, in which case that's a medical condition. There's only 2 sides to it, you know? These kids get caught. And the idea is we're going to stop them get caught and recognise where this iatrogenic harm begins. And it begins when they understand about gender, but although they're told about gender by an adult. But it begins with social transition. It's that simple. It begins with social transition. So we'll end it. They're saying here there is no evidence to suggest that social transition is harmful. Well, that's just a lie. There are better people than I who will look at the details in terms of what they've referenced, but for God's sake, they've referenced Diane Ehrenshaft. If Clive is watching, he'll know who I'm talking about. I think he's done some work on her before. She was the lunatic at the bloody involved in the satanic child abuse panic and who thinks because a child pulls at their romper when they're 3, they have a gender identity. Bloody Ehrenshaft. Right, so I'll leave somebody else to go through these references, you know, somebody who knows what they're talking about. Scientists, you know, or doctors. We'll have a look at that, I'm sure. Okay? So you're not going to get that from me. You're just going to get my ire today. So what it says here, there is no evidence to suggest that social transition is harmful. Okay, it's just, what do they think? They're sitting there going, la, 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 because they, you know, honest to God, they're not listening to what anybody says, right? It seeks to remove from children and parents their ability to make choices about how to live their day-to-day life happily, something that is extremely important in the context of waiting lists for services that is several years long. The fact that you want to be able to continue to take advantage of the gullibility of parents and children because this bloody complicated absolute mess of a medical situation which has come straight out of the back end of academia and has damaged thousands of people is not easily understood by an individual, and certainly not by a parent who is absolutely distraught at their child who is psychologically unwell. Social transition is a medical problem. Next up on their list of what are the overall concerns you might want to raise, we have implications that accessing private healthcare is a safeguarding issue. It is. If they're getting hormones from outside the UK without a diagnosis of gender dysphoria, or whatever the hell they're calling it these days, because that's not really a thing, is it? Let's be honest, right? If people are accessing hormones, young people and children are accessing hormones from outside the country, all right, from people who are unregistered. We know what happened with Webley. You didn't mention that, did you? Right? We know what happened. There is a conflation between private and unregulated providers. Safeguarding referrals will be initiated when people. So, for example, if we find out a child's got on hormones and the parents accessing them from Bulgaria or wherever, there'll be a safeguarding concern. You're damn right. Transhousing by proxy. Transhousing by proxy. That's what it bloody well should be called. Right? We know damn well what happens when you use unregulated providers. What they're saying is here. They're not saying you should or shouldn't use them here, which is the daft thing. They're saying that they're conflating private and unregulated providers. So it's not that they're all bad, it's some of them are bad. Sleight of hand, you see, sleight of hand. A kind of perverse legerdemain. Right, restricted access to puberty blockers that is not based on clinical need. Puberty blockers will only be accessible with mandatory enrolment onto long-term research programs. We know this. This is good news, okay? This would require children and young people to be part of a clinical trial to access essential care that is clinically indicated. Gosh, a clinical trial, actual clinical trial, actually really, having some rigor to this process to find out what exactly is going on so that in the end we can hopefully eradicate the need for any of it at all as we begin to understand the psychological underpinnings of why somebody thinks there's something they can never be. So, what they're saying is that the specification implies that the criteria to access blockers may be further limited, right? They're also saying that the fact that people aren't going to be able to get them is not in line with ethical standards for healthcare research. These are the people talking about WPATH, for God's sake. Where did that come from? Wonder if it's worth a look. Right, okay, so it also says here there are contradictions with international best practice. Thank God. Thank God there are contradictions with international best practice, because England here will absolutely lead the way. We will lead the way on stopping this. Make no doubt about it. Right? So here they begin, they quote WPATH. Isn't that the people that wanted eunuchs? Bollockless men in it? Wasn't there some conversation of eunuchs or some bloody, some flipping server they were involved in that had men writing stories about castration fantasies while giving their Jimmy Riddle a dangle? WPATH. World Professional Association for Transgender Health. It outlines the latest evidence and clinical evidence developed by experts in the field. Yeah, God forbid it should be anybody outside the field, eh? Because if you go outside the field, you're not part of the little, it's all a bit, academic circle jerking. Okay, lack of evidence. The previous specification included a 4-page reference list of relevant research, but this interim service specification cites one flawed study. They're saying the study that's being used is flawed. Is that Cass they're talking about? Do you reckon? Is it? Is it? Is it? Who knows? Right? None of the abundant research in the field, abundant. Not clinically factual, abundant. So it's, if there's more of it, it must be better. This is science by, vote, by democracy. Science is not done. Science is not done by consensus, you nut jobs. How might you respond to each question? Well, I wouldn't bother. I I wouldn't bother. Go do something else with your time. Oh, my God. Then they move on. We get to question 3. Question 2 is about who are you? Right, question 3. To what extent do you agree with the 4 substantive changes to the service specification listed in the supporting documents? Right, so what they're saying is, so the clinical team's now going to change. There's going to be more people coming in from different areas. It says here, to extend the clinical team to include experts in paediatric medicine, autism, neurodisability and mental health. I'd add one more, which I'd have an expert who's got the ability to spot bullshit in anything that's written by them. I wonder who got this. It should be me. Employ me. Oh. Right, so going to extend the clinical team. This is good news, right? More people. And what have they got to say about that? That more support and expertise are welcome. Be sure to say that first. That's what they're saying. But these experts, wait for it. Here it comes. These experts must receive thorough and appropriate training on how to support trans and gender diverse children and young people prior to beginning clinical work. I wonder who's going to supply that. They've got a sales pitch in the middle of this document. Oh dear. It says that the involvement of more people should not lead to even longer delays. Oh, I hope it does. I hope it leads to delays so long that you can't see someone until 12 years have passed. Because that's about the time it takes somebody to realise they've made a mistake in it. It's what it is with the people I know. It's about, 10 to 12 years and it's like, what have I done? To the point where they can speak about it. Right? That's what I would say. Right, this is the bit that kills me. It just does. I can't believe they've written it, but they have. Right, so to extend the team, we want to make sure that if they do extend the team, which I think is a good thing, we extend the team, make a bigger team, get more stuff going on, that the the extension of the clinical team should not lead to differential diagnosis. Can you imagine? They don't want people to get a full diagnosis. Right? And they don't want people to get a full diagnosis because they know in their heart of hearts, they know the only way to keep this going is to affirm it. They know it. And you have to affirm it because if you don't affirm it, there'll be other reasons why you're doing it. Listen to detransitioners. There'll be other reasons why you're doing it, right? They don't want a differential diagnosis. So you take the child, you just affirm it. That's what they're saying. That is coded speak for affirm. If you're reading along, we're on page 5, paragraph 3 or 4. Oh. It must not lead to differential diagnosis. I mean, my God. Believe the child. I can't stop thinking about that little gay guy. Bouncing down the stairs pretending he was Barbara Streisand. I hate these people. Let's move on. Clinical leadership. Right, they're going to have a clinical lead for the service that must be a medical doctor. I've said this before. I don't think it should be a medical doctor. I think it should be an old curmudgeon that's having none of it. But then I would, wouldn't I? Because I'm, a smug, self-opinionated, bloviating windbag of epic proportions. There is going to be a medical doctor. I don't think it should be. I genuinely do. I think this is a cultural problem with a medical element. I think it should be somebody else, but that's just me. What you might want to raise. You want to tell the people, tell these people that this doctor must be an expert in the care of trans and gender diverse children, informed by global experts in the area prior to beginning clinical work. So you mean somebody that's as wrapped up in WPATH and all the crap that comes with it as you are? No. This is just so bad. Right. They're also worried that the fact that there's going to be a clinical lead means that this shift should not infer that gender diversity is inherently a medical issue. It's you that infers that gender diversity is a medical issue. It's you that's done it. In the 1980s, when all my mates were pouncing around with makeup on, looking like something out of some Baroque painting, nobody said to them, God, you best get your niblets cut off, because you're a woman. Nobody. It's you that's pathologized gender diversity. You, by introducing the idea of gender identity, which you took from that stinking filth bag, John Money. That's what it is. It's you that's done it. The cheek of these people. The cheek of them. Oh, They also are told here to recognise the World Health Organization and other leading health bodies have committed to depathologizing trans people. Well, they have committed to depathologizing trans people. I didn't realise we had depathologized them, but apparently we are. We're going to depathologize it. Are we now? Are we? Define trans. Give us the definition. Give us the definition, right? Because at the moment, I think the thing is that the people at the WHO think that a trans person is Amy Cropper, right? What they don't realise is that your umbrella, Stonewall, which Mermaids has got sort of, got itself enamoured of, also includes, the Marks and Spencer's changing room wankers and twats wangling their tits over barriers in America when women try to speak. Give us a definition of trans. You can't even do that now. If you mean people with a severe mental issue who are unable to reconcile the reality of their own body and their own life with reality, then say so, in which case you've got my support to give them as much support as necessary, which will not include, because we now know it doesn't work, sticking the clothes on of other people when you're 11 years old and having your bits chopped off when you were 18. It won't include that, right? But for God's sake. Oh, what comes next? Well, we then have what you might want to raise, right? What you might want to raise on page 6. To make sure that the new requirement for a pre-referral consultation, because there has to be a pre-referral, right? Said about that already, right? It may cause delays and barriers for those with unsupportive GP. Supportive of what? Because the child tells you they are, you believe. It's affirmation. So you're asking for affirmation again. Are you? You want to stick with the affirming model, which Cass has trounced. And then it goes on waffling, right? Okay, this point about, is very service. This service. So there's a particular concern here they've got with this one particular bit. Although new referrals will be made to the service, it is recognised it is unlikely that the interim service will be able to offer direct assessment and or intervention. Good. It's meant to be a triage. It's some kind of dysphoria. On an individualised level, I mean on an individualised, that is looking at the whole child with a holistic approach, is the last thing on the box ticking exercise. There'll be something else there. Their sexuality, the fact that they were raised in a care home, the fact that they may have been abused or suffered trauma, that's all coming before we tick the gender identity box. It should get to the point where we never have to tick it at all. So they're worried that it says here that this appears to suggest that the interim service will only see those children and young people who are currently on the waiting list for GIDS at the Tavistock. That's right. That's what it seems to refer to me as well. So what we've done essentially is cut off the pipeline. Excellent. The affirmation pipeline's been cut off. They're unhappy about it. They want the people that read this to tell the NHS they're unhappy about it. They're also asking that individuals can get a second opinion. No. Like when I went to the doctors, I said to the doctor, every time I do that, it hurts. She said, well, don't do it then. I thought, how terrible. I said, I'd like a second opinion. He said, okay, you're ugly. Thanks, Tommy. Right, okay. Then they rattle on about timelines. Just, So let's get to question 4. I know it's going on a bit long, but there's a fair bit here. Question 4, right, okay. To what extent do you agree? Have a coffee. Take it. You can always pause it, It's not me, really. It's called video. Right, question 4. Question 4. To what extent do you agree that the interim service specification provides sufficient clarity about approaches towards social transition? So, essentially what Cass has said is it's a psycho-medical intervention if a child socially transitions. And what they're saying is it's not a medical intervention. Bear in mind this is Mermaids, run by some woman who took a kid to Thailand for a castration party at 16. It's not a medical intervention, should not and cannot be restricted by medical professionals. Should not and cannot be restricted by. What they're saying is they're going to do it anyway. They're going to encourage people to do it anyway. They are absolute acolytes of the belief system in gender identity ideology. Cannot and should not. Cannot and should not. Yeah, they're going to keep doing it. And run counters to the autonomy of young people. Autonomy of young people. Taking the children off that bit, haven't they? Individual children and their families should be free to follow a path of social transition where this makes the child or young person feel happier. Why is happy the game? Why is happy the game? So what if they're happier? If I gave them cannabis when they were 12, they'd be happier. Give them some heroin, why don't you? Make them happier. Give them everything they want, make them happier. Sometimes want doesn't get. And happier is not the end goal. Okay? Safeguarding out the window. Safeguarding out the window. They just don't care. Contemporary evidence and international best practice. WPATH again. There are numerous benefits of social transition, including improved mental health and well-being. And they've quoted something from 2017, 2016. Again, more people who are better than I will look into the in-depth nature of their references. Perhaps some of you could have a look and let us know. There is no evidence cited to support the substantial change of direction. Yet, well, we aren't changing direction. We're saying full stop. We don't know. That's what we're saying. We don't know. And therefore we are having a full stop until we know. You think you know, so therefore you want to go ahead with it. You should not social transition these people. I don't think you should social transition anybody, but that's just me. Right? Wear what you want. Nobody cares. Sake. Right, international best practice, i.e. WPATH. No. We're beginning to realise it's not. We'll look at the history of WPATH at some point on this channel. Let's see where it came from, shall we? Right, then it says, the recognition that someone's gender may change or develop over time. Gender may change. There's no such thing. Is not sufficient justification to negate or deter social transition for a prepubescent child when it would be beneficial. It is never beneficial to affirm insanity in a child. It says then attempting to reverse an adolescent's gender expression, fashion, right? Gender identity, personality, gender expression, fashion. So attempting to reverse an adolescent's gender expression, i.e. their fashion, who do that? Is tantamount to conversion therapy. How dare they use that terminology? In which, with gay people, there was some real harm. And now they're the ones practicing conversion therapy on gay people, and they're pretending it's something that happens to them. How dare they? And then they talk about the Memorandum of Understanding, which has been debunked so many times, I don't know. A joint document signed by over 25 health, counselling and psychotherapy organisations, all of whom did not know a clue about which they were speaking. They said that conversion therapy seeks to suppress an individual's expression of sexual orientation. Yeah, we know this. Or gender identity. Gender identity doesn't exist. On the basis that one orientation or identity is preferable to another. No, your personality is multifaceted. It'll have many things in it. It might mean that one day you want to wear a dress, the next day you don't. Who cares? Nobody cares. Wear what you want. Wear what you want. You do not have a soul occupying your flesh sack with a gender identity. It's not there. It didn't there. Then they go on to say that this is taken from the endocrine societies, the clear evidence, The lack of evidence is clear throughout the specification, with only one flawed citation used to justify the statement that in prepubertal children, gender incongruence does not persist into adolescence. It doesn't. For the love of God, the Tavistock's own figures show us that it doesn't. Right? If you don't start kids down this pathway of this ridiculous cult, then they aren't going to end up in trouble. Right? What they're saying is that this is taken from the Endocrine Society's clinical practice guidelines, which in turn is based on outdated studies from the 20th century, largely concerned with problematizing gender deviant behaviour. Oh, deviant gender role behaviour. Look, I don't even know what a gender role is. I know what a sex role is. Right? She does the dishes, he fixes the car. That's something like the 1950s, isn't it? I also know that a sex role is that a mother breastfeeds. A father doesn't. All right? Just because there are sex roles which are human, which they are, and they're built in many cases, doesn't mean we're stuck with them. Okay, we can transcend many things, and that's one of them. What we don't need to do is rename it as some sort of idea of gender identity and not, deviant. It's a horrible word. I don't like it. It's a terrible word because it was used for me many times years ago. Right? There's nothing deviant about these people. They're just confused. Okay? Anybody who wants to chop their bits off and thinks they can be something they're not, I've said it before and I'll say it again, is in trouble up here. Okay? Then they've done more research from Olson, study further, most of these studies I've seen, and some of you may well have as well, and they've already been debunked. It was done by 33 people who said after 5 years they still wanted to be it's 9 to 13. That's the key period. Right, once you realise that things are going to get really nasty, medically. Listen to detransitioners. Listen to the words of detransitioners. Yeah. Listen to Richie. Yeah. Or Siobhan. Listen to the words of detransitioners. Understand what you're doing to your children. if you allow them to get involved with these cranks. Right, so research from 2020 is another one, from 2020. 30 parents of pre-pubertal children, trans children, there's no trans children, I'm not going to say again, found that parents observed mental health, well-being, education, attainment and happiness once their children had socially transitioned. Right, great, so that's right, they're happy at school, you know, their well-being's better, their education attainment improves, and then when they get to NT 18, they lock their bits off. That's a hell of a price to pay, innit? Got them on the puberty blockers yet, have you, Susie? One study found that 60% of trans males and 53% of trans female clients knew their gender identity before the age of 5. It is not unknown that individuals who have a fetish or a paraphilia will wire that fetish or paraphilia into their own personal history narrative. And they'll do so to justify their behaviour and thought patterns. Not the same as being gay, folks, you know. That doesn't mean to say it's not possible that a child has had psychological issues that have meant that it's felt that way for a very long time. That's different. But, you know, children don't have paraphilias and fetishes. You can't tie them into your past. Paraphilia and fetishes are the domain of adults. Sexually ready adults. So we have to be very careful conflating all this, which is what they're doing. Just because someone didn't express gender difference in childhood, that is not evidence that they are not trans. Yeah, just affirm. That's what meant that men can just say they're trans, get into women's prisons, and then also overtake, you know, women's lists in Parliament and get in, you know, and then run for council like Eddie bloody Izzard and all the other, you know, these absolutely disgraceful men with no sense of justice towards anything and a narcissistic belief in their own goodness. I'm talking about myself now. Question 5. To what extent do you agree with the approach to the management of patients accessing prescriptions from unregulated sources? Yeah, no. What they're saying is, in their documentation here, is that they've said there's conflation between regulated and unregulated. This will prevent some patients from seeking other support from GPs. It's just nonsense. The whole thing's nonsense. They were frightened of being reported to safeguarding teams. That's funny. I think it's probably a good idea that people are cautious about how they deal with children in case they get reported to safeguarding. And although I'm not a huge fan of government interference, it has to be said, for a safeguarding team to be called in, I imagine it would have to be pretty serious. And safeguarding should be at the head of this. This is the most important thing. It's children and young people we're talking about here. Safeguarding should be the first consideration. I'm trans. I think I'm 5. Right, now in some cases you say, that's all right. You want a biscuit? Right, go and play. Just let them get on with it, and they will. They get to 11 or 12 and they're starting to go, I want to do it in school. You bet we need to look. In particular, if hormones are being accessed without recourse to the NHS. So let's go to question 6. We're nearly there, folks. Stay with me. I know it's a long one. Are there any other changes or additions to the service specifications you'd like to see? And again, what might you want to raise? The WPATH standards of care. Fucking WPATH. Oh, WPATH. No, we don't want anything to do with it, right? The service specification presents the use of puberty blockers as experimental. It is experimental. What are you talking about? They're literally ignoring everything from CAS. What are you talking about? There is no acknowledgement. Wait, here we go. See, there is no acknowledgement that not all parents, carers, schools and local authorities will be supportive. I bloody hope not. Right? They need to support the child's route to wellness, which will not include pretending to be something they're not. End of story. There is no acknowledgement that not all parents, carers, schools and local authorities will be supportive. WPATH Standards of Care 8 does acknowledge this and states that sometimes it is not appropriate to include parents or carers in decision making. They've quoted Diane Ehrenshaft in this, as I mentioned earlier on. They're now saying that you shouldn't include some parents in the decision making. These are just the type of people who want to take your kids. Not literally. I don't mean literally. But they want to undermine it. Sound familiar? Sound familiar? Gender identity, ideology, queer theory. It's all about undermining that parental control. It's all about the fact that they think they know best. It's the most revolting kind of narcissistic compassion I've ever come across in my life. And if you've been watching Twitter today, you'll see that the Scottish Parliament's doing the same thing. An absolutely revolting statement from some woman. Beyond the pale. I'll put the links to that in there in the doobers. Right. They then go on to talk about equality impact assessment. It says most gender incognizance doesn't persist into adolescence. They're repeating themselves here, really. No evidence is given to support this. I mean, they know there's no evidence. We know there's evidence to support it. They're worried that holistic care will mean barriers to treatment because they think the kids should only get the treatment. What they're talking about here, and the angle they're coming from, you have to understand this, is these people are stopping affirmative care. That's what they see. And they are saying to themselves, what in this is it possible to criticise and pull apart so that kids get affirmative care? They don't care about the kids. They care about the idea. Right? Because if they didn't, they'd be saying, what is the best to be done for these children? They've been around for years. It's taken Cass to come forward and say this. It's taken Cass to come forward and say, look what these people have been doing. They do not care about the children. They care about their ideology. You've got to get your head around this. And hopefully we can drag these mermaids into the sunlight and onto the shore and let them die. Because the sooner they do, the better. Ta-da, bye-bye. You know, having a paedophile on your board. Really? Paedophile, we don't know if he is, but I mean, a bloke who writes about it and says, yeah, it should be a thing. On your board, right? And then you get some bloke go and play with his penis on television. Turns out he's involved with some other group, educate and, masturbate, whatever they're called. What's this all about? And all I can do is sit here and think, the world's gone mad. The world's gone mad. Well, take the things, subscribe, share, buy me a coffee, Patreon. Oh God, it's getting so low on the list, isn't it? Become a warrior teacher. You don't have to be a teacher to be a warrior teacher. The warrior teacher program is open to everyone who wants to come along and join in. Everybody. Anybody can join it. As long as they're over 18. Everybody can join it. Right? It's that simple, really. It's that straightforward. They have to be over 18 because some of the films are. So I'm going to leave that for now because it's the longest one I've done for ages and it really shouldn't go on for so long, but it is. I read this shit and all I can think about is that little boy who came bouncing down the stairs thinking he was Barbra Streisand. What would these bastards have done to me? And how long are we going to continue to let these bastards do it to others? Think on that.